and people haven't considered the Labour Party as a viable option for them. That's something that we've got to challenge. That's something we've got to tackle on the doorstep.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the North Devon Labour podcast. Our guest this week is a staunch Labour supporter, a lifelong member of the Labour Party, a member of the South Molton community, who's a well-known campaigner. He's been supporting the members of his community to a really, really tremendous extent during the coronavirus pandemic. He was for 10 years the governor of the South Molton Community Infant School. He's the vice chair of the North Devon Labour Party. And at the elections this May, he is standing as the Labour County Council candidate for the residents of South Molton. So, Steve Hinchliffe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
It's really great to have you here. Thanks so much for being with us. I'd just like to dive straight in, if you don't mind, and ask you, you're standing as a candidate for the County Council seat in South Molton, but why, Steve? What's possessed you to do that?
Well, I've been standing in South Molton as town councillor, as district councillor elections, and previously as a county councillor election candidate. I feel that I want to do it. I'm desperate to represent the Labour Party, and I want to represent the Labour Party in South Molton.
Tell us a bit about what it is within the division that you feel would benefit from your experience and from the values that you bring as a member of the Labour Party.
Well, certainly, as in my division, as in any division, I'm convinced that the division would benefit from having a Labour candidate, a Labour councillor, espousing Labour politics and socialist values. And they haven't had that in this division in anybody's living memory. It's about time.
I absolutely agree with you. And it's a running theme, isn't it, across North Devon and through large parts of the county in the southwest, that feeling that so many people have of being deprived of voice in local and national politics. So with that in mind, what is it that drew you to the Labour Party in the first place? I mean, going back all those years, what are the values that you really have an affinity with, that you feel are lacking in the representation of the people in South Molton and in North Devon?
Right. Well, as a socialist, the Labour Party was maybe doesn't make it necessarily a natural home, but the Labour Party has always been closer to espousing my socialist values than any other mainstream political party, and thereby my socialist beliefs with regard to equality and fairness and opportunity for all is something that South Molton residents deserve as much as anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And what areas do you think there are? I mean, I know that there are issues in South Molton with job opportunities, with income, with housing. You tell us a bit about those and how you feel that those needs aren't quite being met at the moment.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I have been involved in education in South Molton through the schools as a governor, as you mentioned, and education is a big thing of mine, but also housing and employment. In South Molton, there does seem to be a great deal of housing going on, but the residents, the young families of South Molton aren't going to benefit from that. There's big sites being built up and people moving in. Now, these people aren't going to find employment in town so very easily, whereas young families, young people in South Molton, struggling to find employment as they are, they may have employment, but that won't allow them to buy these new houses. The promise of affordable housing is always a pie in the sky promise. So something I would very much like to push, if successful, and in any capacity to represent South Molton, is a community housing project, which is is being undertaken in Mort Ho at the moment, in Woolacombe, and it's something that could help the young people to afford housing in South Molton. That is a big thing of mine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess you're referring to the Community Land Trust. Is that
Yes.
right? Yeah. And
Yes.
there's one in Georgia, of course, as well. And it's an interesting theme, isn't it, running through an area that's so beautiful, so sought after, has a strong tourist industry, and yet the people who live here, born and bred here, as you say, are struggling to get on the housing ladder because the housing that is being built it doesn't seem to be catering for their needs.
No, not at all, no.
That's great. That's really interesting. Thanks, Steve. So I'd love to go back a bit in your in your life and your sort of association with socialism and the Labour Party. Give us a bit of history about you. How you got involved in campaigning, what sort of campaigning you got in, whether there was anything before you with the Labour Party. Tell us a bit about your history.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I haven't got to this age of my life without a fair amount of experience on the road. A big thing for me is representation. I feel slightly honoured that I've been living in an area where I was represented by a strong Labour socialist. Living in Tottenham in North London, and I was represented by Bernie Grant. That's the sort of inspiration that's emboldened my politics, that emboldened my socialism, that determined me to take up the banner. I had the opportunity to work in London in Bethnal Green, knocking on doors at election time and stuff like that, and real challenging campaigning work in the front line, which London is often seen. And of course, I want to be able to bring that frontline politics to North Devon, to South Molton.
And that's an interesting question. How does campaigning in Tottenham compare with campaigning in North Devon? Because obviously, when a lot of people think about the Labour Party, they do think of those urban, large town, industrial town and city centres, and not so much the rural areas. So where do you think Labour's strengths lie in a rural area, and what's it like knocking on those doors in South Molton?
Well, it's tough. There's a great difference, and it's often the conversation where you get a rebuttal like something. They'll say, "I didn't even know there was a Labour Party around here." You wouldn't get that on the doorstep in Tottenham.
No, sure.
And it's that sort of thing that South Molton and the West Country and North Devon specifically does seem to carry a burden. It hasn't been represented, or very badly represented, and people haven't considered the Labour Party as a viable option for them. That's something that we've got to challenge. That's something we've got to tackle on the doorstep.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So that's all the that's the heavy stuff. So what I'd like to know, Steve, one question that I like to ask people who are representing or would like to represent people in North Devon and their towns and villages is, what's your favourite part of North Devon? What do you love about where you live?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not alone, but my wife and I, we just love to go to the coast as much as possible, and that's the beauty of South Molton. We're close enough to get to a lot of the coast, but we don't get floods, sort of thing. And so we had that beauty, and people come down and see you. You're living in North Devon. Relatives come, friends come. They want to stay with you, so you can take them to the coast. You can show them, and you get filled with pride when you're taking family and friends around North Devon, the coastline, the countryside, and the market towns. And people love South Molton Market. Well, who wouldn't?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's interesting that lots of people have that same experience. We have the same thing here in my family household. People are desperate to come and see us, and I'm sure it's not to see us. It's because we live in paradise. I say it. A friend of mine was asking me recently, would you ever leave the area? And I said, no. Why would I? I live in paradise. It's a wonderful place to be. And so, outside of politics, Steve, what do you do to relax what are your hobbies? What do you enjoy doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a carpenter. I'm a self-employed carpenter, so I really do need downtown time because I've been working in the building industry for a long time. So I like to enjoy my downtime, and my wife and I, we do a lot of walking. We do coastal walking, and I'm also a member of the local running club, the South Molton Strugglers, that I always like to challenge at every opportunity. I mean, my heavy duty running days are pretty much behind me. I did do a couple of London marathons, which I will never tire of rabbiting on about to try and impress people. But I bake. A newfound thing, a wonderful present from my wife at Christmas, a bread oven, so I'm a baker, and I like to cook, and I read incessantly. Bake for the NHS recently. My wife works for the NHS, and so I was able to send cakes into the wards, which I was very happy about.
That's a beautiful thing. That's amazing. Did they like them? I mean, were they well received?
Yeah, they were, funny enough. I mean, you picture it's to the staff, not to the ward, because I think there'd have to be a health check. But I was really overwhelmed with the good response I had from my wife's work colleagues.
That's lovely. Oh, well, that's a lovely thing to know. But of course, you have also been doing a lot of work, as I mentioned in the introduction, in your community during the coronavirus pandemic. Tell us a bit about that. I mean, that must have been really, really tough. But I imagine fulfilling, and the community spirit across North Devon. We've had some fantastic stories. So tell us a bit about what you've experienced.
Yeah, certainly. At the start of the pandemic, I was working in the construction industry, but the sites were closed down then because the building, the suppliers were not able to supply. So we were all in lockdown. And so I volunteered for the National NHS Volunteer Service, the SAM response, and I had the honour and the privilege to collect medications and take to people who were housebound or were isolating, and I was able to help my local corner shop, just literally taking food deliveries to people who were isolated or indeed unable to get out because of the pandemic. And I did feel a great deal of response from people, real positivity. So grateful that people are making the effort, and I'm hoping that that's going to continue because it's been going on a long time, and sometimes these things tend to wane. But the public spirit that was evident in the early part last year was really overwhelming. Since then, the building industry started to deal with it, and I've gone back to work.
But it's great, that community spirit that we've all experienced. There's not going to be news to anyone, and for me, and I don't know how about you feel, it's one of those things that I really hope we managed to hang on to after the pandemic. And so, as a final thought before we finish, I was wondering if there's, out of this horror that we've all been experiencing for the last 12 months now, what is it that you would like to see? Which positive would you like to take out of the pandemic and hold on to and sort of integrate into everyday life as we move on?
Well, I've already alluded to it, but this thing that this community, this absolute community spirit, and noticing it with delivering from my local shop, people really do rely on people. We are each other's best resource as we live with our neighbours, our community, and that's always been the case. But clearly the pandemic has brought that to a fore, and that would be wonderful if that continues. Communities such as South Molton, who had a great deal of spirit, has been enhanced even more so by this, and people who would consider themselves on the periphery of the community have been drawn in out of necessity, out of need, and that's a good thing that has to be continued.
Yeah, that's a really, really great thought to leave with, and thanks for that, Steve. I really appreciate what you're saying there, and I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people. Thanks so much for speaking to us this afternoon, Steve. Really appreciate it. It's great to get a bit of an insight into who you are, why you're standing, and let the people of South Molton and across North Devon know about you and the work that you've been doing. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
Cheers.